Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. Now, this is a video a lot of you have been waiting for, I think. Some of you have been talking about this for a while. Well, I did say I'd make it, and I will make it. And I have. Now, it's quite interesting. You get one of these synchronicity type events in your life, because I've got one today, because it's actually 1 year today when I'm shooting this. I don't know when I'm going to upload it, but it's 1 year today since I uploaded my video about Stefan Molyneux and UFOs, my reply video to Stefan Molyneux. So that's interesting, because that's my first reply video to Stefan, and also it's about UFOs. And this video I'm going to make today is about UFOs. Now, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to make a lot of references. I will insert maybe some slides at certain points. But the best thing to do, I think, is, it may take you a while because it's a long video, but watch my Skeptic video that I uploaded last week. There's a link in the description box, as per usual, and you can actually watch my Skeptic video, because that's an important resource for understanding what I'm going to say in this particular video. Okay, now this is a reply video. It's a response video, whatever you want to call it. YouTube, of course, doesn't have automatic responses now. You have to you used to have that function, now you don't. But this is a response video, a reply video. I say reply. It's a reply video. In fact, strange enough, it's actually a reply video to a reply video to a reply video. And I don't know if you have that many combinations of such on YouTube. It's not very, very usual. It's by I'm replying to Steve Mumbling. Now, Steve Mumbling, who sort of lives up to his name, you may know him if you comment, because he's always commenting in my comments box. Now, vehemently disagreeing with everything I say. I don't have a problem with that, to be honest. I don't mind people. This is what I've always said. I don't mind people who disagree with me, and this is I often get accused of this by trolls. But you can disagree with me as much as you like. But as long as you're civil, I don't care. And Steve has been civil to me, and he's reasonably civil in this video he's made, at least compared to the trolls he is. I will be mentioning some of his I will be referring to his conduct as well as his content, but basically I don't really have a problem with his conduct. And he's quite welcome to post comments wherever he likes on my videos. I know Andrew Johnson's blocked him, which is well, I can't say what kind of relationship Andrew has with Steve. It may be different to the one I have with him, but I personally wouldn't block Steve or anyone else who makes comments that Steve makes. Now, I actually just took a look at Steve's channel, which is something I hadn't done for a while. I tried to reply to. I think I replied to all his comments. Sometimes in the reply videos I do, when I do these reply to comments videos, he accuses me of ignoring some of his comments. I don't think I do. I always say to him, and I'll say this to him again, if you think I've ignored any of your comments, repost them, and maybe I'll reply to them the next time, because it's possible that some slip through the net, because I'm getting so many. It's possible that some of them slip through the net. So just post them again. If I ignore them again or several times, then you may have a case. But until then, please don't assume ill will on my part. Okay, just I think that's a poor assumption to make based on just that. Now, and that's just the start, actually, of where I think you misrepresent me. Now Steve is this chap. I've just had a look through some of the videos on his channel. He's done quite a lot, actually, and it'll take me a while to get through them all. In fact, he's uploaded some just in the last couple of days. I'll have to watch. I'll probably will make more than one response video to what he says. Okay, because he says an awful lot, and this particular video is one that I went through, and there's a massive amount here to reply to. I tried doing the way I usually do it, making notes with time codes on it, and I realised that just flicking between the time codes would be more time consuming than just letting the video play. If necessary, I might edit the video I'm making now, slightly for brevity. If I do, I want Steve to know that it's not because I'm editing him. I'm not cherry picking. He says that he accuses me of that unfairly, I think. I'm not cherry picking what he says. Okay, so I'll just let the video play, and if I need to edit it, I'll edit it, just for brevity's sake. Now the sound quality is not terribly good. That's not a criticism of Steve. That's just a fact, because he's basically recording off his computer using the speakers the way I am, and so there's some parts. Steve's own voice is perfectly audible, but he's making a reply video to the video I made called UFOs: A Reply to Sargon of Akkad. So there's places where you can hear him speaking okay, you can hear me speaking okay, but you can't necessarily hear what Sargon is saying. And there are times when I might have to simply add some commentary to what Sargon is actually saying, which Steve can hear and I can hear, but you might not be able to. Okay, so that's how it's going to go. And there's a massive amount here. I might do his other video as well. Now Steve is this chap, I don't know who he is. He speaks with an educated Australian accent, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And I think maybe he lives in Australia. I don't know where he lives. And it doesn't matter who he is. I'm interested in what he has to say. I've got this hat on here. I don't know if it's not actually for Steve's sake. I just wear this during the winter because I wear a woolly hat, like a beanie this time of year, just to keep my head warm. And I don't want to see, if I have a bald head like this, you get this massive glow from the lights. So I have to put something on there, and I don't want to put my beanie on it, it's too warm. I'll end up looking like a bloody idiot. What's his name? Bronx blogger. He's a twat. I don't want to look like him. So I wear this instead. It'd be too hot in here as well to wear that woolly hat. So, so I'm wearing this hat just at the moment. So I'm just going to start the video, and we'll just go through it one little bit at a time. I've made a few notes here before I realised that it was a bit pointless making notes. Okay, so right, so let's play this video. This video is called, I'll put a link in the description box, of course. I'll just it's called Reply to Ben's Reply to Sargon of Akkad. It's on Steve Mumbling's channel. Okay, so here we go.
Well, another one of these conspiracy theory channels that I look at is Ben the Porter, the Pamwo TV channel. Now Ben,
you love it, Steve, don't you? You love it.
Sees alien spacecraft and conspiracy everywhere and in all things. He thinks 9/11 was a conspiracy. He's convinced there's something to the Roswell. He's doing a reply video to, I don't know.
Did you hear that? Sorry, a little bit of a, let me just go back a bit.
The Roswell incident. Now, he's doing a...
Well, first of all, I've got to just mention, Steve says, what he says, I see conspiracies everywhere. I see conspiracies everywhere and everything. I think that's what he said. I don't think that's an exact quote. The answer is no, I don't. If you watch me regularly, Steve, and I know you do because you can't resist it, can you? You just love it. You love it. You'll know that I explain clearly there are times when I think some things are not conspiracies, and I disagree with many of my fellow conspiratorial people. I don't believe the moon is a spaceship. I don't believe the Illuminati live on Saturn. I don't believe the Earth is flat. I don't believe that Lewis Hamilton is Barack Obama's love child. There are several more that I don't believe, which many other people do. Okay, so I get into arguments with other conspiracy theories, and they call me a shill and an MI6 agent and other things. So I mean, I'm not. Don't marginalise me as some kind of extreme example, because I'm not.
A reply video to, I don't know, some other guy.
He's talking about the Roswell incident now, about my talking to Sargon.
That's talking about UFOs and aliens. And I thought what Ben said here was quite interesting.
Well, that's something, isn't it? Now, I'm just going to repeat. I'm just going to give you a commentary on what Sargon says now.
Conferences are about.
UFO conferences.
It's several people saying, well, I thought everyone was going to laugh at me. I said, well...
Everyone's going to laugh at me, says this UFO conferences are about.
I mean, they probably will.
Yeah, they will. But I mean, that's one of the ways they keep secret, Sargon, you see. This is how this sort of thing's classified.
Can you hear my voice there? This is the way they keep secrets. Okay, through laughter, through ridicule.
It's not necessarily suppression, it's simply control of cultural norms. Control of cultural norms. I think people can make their own minds up, really. You know, people can tell whether something sounds ridiculous or not, I think. So
yes, we can.
There's no control going on. And the other thing too is these people say, oh, there's mind control, there's chemtrails.
No, what he says is there's nothing going on. He says, but people can make their own mind up about what sounds ridiculous or not. Yes, that's true. However, we are influenced by more than just rationality in this world we are in. In fact, we live in a world in which, as I explained in my Skeptic video, we are encouraged to discard rationality. And there is such thing as peer pressure. Peer pressure is a very, very important thing. Not least if your peer pressure includes the need to earn a living. And this is where you often hear skeptics talking about science and about how science says this and science says that, when science is actually carried out by professional scientists who have a need to, they have rent to pay like everyone else, they have a need to live, and they're parts of institutions in which they work alongside others, and there is pressure, there is a herding instinct among people to gravitate towards conventional viewpoints within that community, within that in-group. There's massive amounts of psychological studies done on this. We've actually seen, I mentioned the Milgram experiment, I think I did it in my reply to Sargon, I'm not sure. I've mentioned it in other videos, I'm not going to go through it again. But there's peer pressure experiments where they put people in a room and everyone has to agree about how big a particular line is, how long a particular line is, and they'll find that people will even lie. They will actually go against their own measurement when other people, large numbers of other people in the group, say otherwise. So you've got to ask yourself, in that situation, can real science be done? For instance, if in terms of climate change, if you everything in the conventional world is geared towards climate change being a major problem caused by man-made carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, therefore, if you disagree with that, you're not only going against the scientific consensus, you're going against the political forces of the time. And you also have examples. A lot of slaves have been crucified on the road to Rome in this situation. You have examples of dissenters being the closest thing you have in today's world, being sacked from their jobs, being made a laughing stock in the media, being disowned by their friends. Just look at what David Bellamy, look at the videos Ian R. Crane made. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my tripod slightly, or what passes for a tripod. What David Bellamy, Dr. David Bellamy said when he describes his experience as coming out as a climate change denier, and the way he was treated by the media, by members of his organisations that he went to, even people he'd been on environmental campaigns with, disowned him, they wouldn't speak to him. It's easier, it's far easier in those circumstances to just say, sod what I believe, I'm just gonna say what I need to avoid that kind of experience. We're only a minute and a quarter into this video, I'm already ranting. Well done, Steve. You've really got me going.
Trials and all this sort of stuff.
I'll go back a bit.
Videos up. So.
I've gone back slightly because I've rewound slightly because I don't want Steve to say because Steve starts making another point, which I want to come to.
Going on. And the other thing too is these people say, oh, there's mind control, there's chemtrails and all this sort of stuff. Yet they're putting videos up saying there's mind control and chemtrails. These chemtrails got something to do with mind control. So if they were chemtrails, which they're not, of course.
Yes, they are.
And if there was something to do with mind control, they wouldn't be posting videos because they'd be mind controlled not to, wouldn't they?
It depends how successful the mind control is. It has limited success. Now, this connection between mind control and chemtrails, which you scoff at, is actually a piece of serious research being done by someone called Sophia Smallstorm, and there's several others. There's Cliff Carnicom and many other people. There's several different possibilities here. It could be there's an electromagnetic effect, which seems to be connected to the chemtrail agenda. And I've done videos about chemtrails, and they are real. There seems to be some kind of conductive medium which HAARP is using, the High Altitude Auroral Research Project, which is basically charging the upper atmosphere of the Earth with massive amounts of electrical charge, which could have all kinds of effects. And it may be something to do with the Schumann cavity resonance of the Earth, and in a sense they're trying to manipulate the Earth's electromagnetic body. I'm sorry if I don't have time I can't explain in detail what all that is, what all that means, but I have covered it before. So please do. You just have to, I'm afraid, look through my videos. But I am saying here that I disagree with Steve on this particular issue.
It's it is funny, this stuff.
Well, I'm glad you. At least I give you a laugh, Steve. I mean, honestly, if you know, you obviously, however much you disagree with what I'm saying, and you bring up several other people like Miles and others like that. It's obviously you seem to have some kind of fixation on us, and you certainly feel the need to keep watching our output, and you say it entertains you. So really, that's good enough for me.
So, another thing was on there. I watched this documentary on Netflix the other day, and it's by some guy who
Saigon just said he watched a documentary on Netflix.
claims it's been abducted.
Someone has been abducted.
Dozens of times. And I just
Dozens of
googled it.
times.
It turns out it's been faking everything for fucking years.
It's been faking everything.
Faking like this alien in the window. And
Oh, this is Stan Romanek. Yeah, I mean, you can watch the video. Oh, actually, I might put a link in the description box of that as well. But you can actually watch the video. I don't think does he. Now, Steve doesn't actually provide a link in his description box to the particular video I'm talking about, which is a bit. Well, it's not dishonest, but that's bad practice, Steve. You ought to at least put in source material. But this is a video. It's called "UFOs: A Reply to Sargon of Akkad." You can find it on my channel, and if I remember, I'll put a link in the description box to that as well.
Oh, that's Stan Romanek. Well, again, that's a bit of a straw man, Sargon. Come on.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that Sargon is producing a straw man.
There's better things than that. There's much more credible. There's much more credible examples you could have given. But if you don't want to give them, then if you don't want to give better examples, then I've got to conclude maybe that you are avoiding giving good examples, because
Is Sargon avoiding giving better examples? Yeah.
Yeah. Now Ben avoids good examples.
Do I?
Ben is convinced there's something to the Roswell incident.
Yes, I am.
Of course, it gives him something to do. He can wear his Roswell 70 t-shirt and write his Roswell books. But
Hold a minute. It gives me something to do, doesn't it? I can wear my Roswell 70 t-shirt. I can write my Roswell books. So now, Steve, that's a cheap shot. You are making a judgment of my motives, and this often happens. I mean, you get this with Richard Dawkins. Well, not from Richard Dawkins, but anyone. Have you noticed, if you look at Richard Dawkins and things he says, Richard Dawkins has written a whole large number of very best-selling books. I mean, I've got a copy of one of his books there, The God Delusion. It's up on my shelf. I think I sold 6 million copies, or even more now. It's been translated into a dozen languages, and he's obviously very wealthy as a result of it. And well, good luck to him. He's providing a product which people like, so I don't have a problem with that. But there's several people who've written books disagreeing with Dawkins, like Alistair McGrath, for example, and there's a couple of other people. Now, whenever anyone writes a book disagreeing with Dawkins's book, Richard Dawkins will call them, although they're obviously, he describes them as never was a dog praised so much by his fleas. And the implication here is that they're basically blood-sucking off him. They're just writing their books in the slipstream in order to make money. So that's the rule, right? You write a book about atheism and skepticism, okay? You're a good guy. You're proud. And Dawkins has a very, very inflated opinion of himself. I've heard some private things about him, I'll tell you. You're a good man who wants to educate the people through science and reason, okay? You write a book disagreeing with atheism and skepticism, no matter what the content of that book is, and you are some money-hungry blackguard who just wants to line his own pockets. That's the rule, okay? That is the inescapable rule. And this is what Steve... I don't know if Steve hasn't accused me of this, but he says it gives me something to do, something to sell, and something to wear. Well, that's an assumption on your part, Steve, and it's clearly an attempt to manipulate your viewer's opinion of me, which is not not an honest thing to do. So we're just over 2 minutes into the video, and you're already hitting me with what I call in my skeptic video, the sneer. Please watch my skeptic video for details on that.
I actually posted a link to a statement made by Mac Brazel, which is actually on this channel. describing the Roswell debris. Now, Mac Brazel was the guy that found the Roswell debris. It wasn't found on July the 7th, it was found on July the 14th. He describes it as bits of tin foil, you know, balsa wood sticks and all this sort of stuff. Now, I posted a link to that on Ben's channel, might have been one of his Roswell videos, but he chooses to ignore that. You know, the person that found it, he chooses to ignore. Now that's a pretty good example, and he's choosing to ignore it. So he's doing exactly what he's suggesting this other chap is doing. I haven't looked all the way through this. Hang
on a minute. So I choose to ignore a comment, a link that Steve Mumbling has posted in my comment section. Okay. I choose to ignore it. I've chosen to ignore it. How do you know that, Steve? How do you know I've chosen to ignore it? Do you know how many comments I get? Do you know how many of them I don't get the chance to reply to? Okay, I don't get the chance to reply to them because somehow they don't get posted, or I slip through the net in some other way. I have endeavoured to answer all the comments you put on there. I mean, if you watch my reply videos, you come up all the time. And I do address all the comments that I see on my comments feed there. Now, not all of them appear on there. Some of them get into the spam folder. And last time I know I forgot to approve all the comments in the spam folder. Maybe it went there for some reason. If you're posting links, it's quite likely it just went to the spam folder and that I accidentally deleted it rather than approved it. Okay? That was a mistake on my part, and I apologise. But you're completely making a very convenient assumption here that I chose to ignore it because I don't want to hear it. You see, he's going to accuse me of cherry picking in a minute, okay, and I'll come to that when he does. But he's basically saying I don't want to face evidence which I don't agree with. I want only to look at the evidence that I agree with. Okay, so he says that Mac Brazel. So he talks about Mac. I'll go. What does he say? He says Mac Brazel. I should have just.
I'm going to pause this. Was the guy that found the Roswell.
Okay, let's go back
avoids good examples. Ben is convinced there's something to the Roswell. The wood sticks and all this sort of stuff. Now, I posted a link to that on Ben's channel, might have been one of his Roswell videos, but he chooses to ignore that. You know, the person that found it, he chooses to ignore. Now that's a pretty good example, and he's choosing to ignore it. So he's doing exactly what he's suggesting this other chap is doing.
Right. Firstly, he said, no, I know what he's referring to. He's referring to this. Where are we? Okay. I had my notes. Hang on, I had this in my notes. It's gone now. Where is it? Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. Play amongst yourselves for a moment. I want to see. I mean, here we go. Where is it? Hang on. Yeah, okay. This is now. He says that Mac Brazel's the man who found the Roswell debris. Okay, right. I don't deny that. I know that's true. William Mac Brazel found the debris. Now he says, he found it on July the 14th, not July the 7th. That's strange because there's an interview with Mac Brazel in the Roswell Daily Chronicle, July the 9th, 1947, where he describes exactly what he found. Now, this interview has gone down in history. This is July the 9th was the day after the fake story came out about the weather balloon. W.W. Brazel, 48, Lincoln County rancher living 30 miles southeast of Corona. That's where the first site was, the debris site. Okay, and he just describes finding this material, and he says he previously found 2 weather balloons on his ranch, but what he found at this time did not in any way resemble either of these. I'm sure what I found was not any weather balloon, he said, but if I find anything else beside a bomb, they're going to have a hard time getting me to say anything about it. Now what he describes, he actually doesn't definitively state that what he saw was anything alien. Now it was actually when he actually took this debris into the police, and the police notified the Army Air Base. That's when Jesse Marcel got involved, the intelligence officer. And he describes several things. He describes smoky grey in colour, these materials scattered over an area of 200 yards in diameter. Tinfoil, he said it was more like lead foil. There's rubber, he describes rubber, paper, tape, sticks in a bundle. There was no sign of any metal in the area, nothing, and one paper fin. These are the things he used. Now this is, and he describes also, it's no strings and wire to be found, but there were some eyelets in the paper, eyelets indicating that some kind of attachment had been used. Okay, this is literally what he said. Now this doesn't necessarily match with what, maybe I'll say more about this in a minute, because he'll bring it up again in a moment, but this doesn't match what Jesse Marcel said. Okay, but he makes many more points. I'll tackle these one at a time. But basically, Brazel, well, firstly, he was interviewed. I mean, I don't know when the material was found. The material was found. The material was actually found sometime before July the 8th. We don't know exactly when. I think what it's possible here that Steve has simply just got confused. To give him the benefit of the doubt, he might have got a bit confused and meant to say June the 14th, not July the 14th. Okay, so that's possibly what happened here. But it may have been as long ago as the middle of June. Yeah, we don't know exactly when. There's several different stories here. But I'll carry on, because Steve does bring this up a bit more. He talks about this in a lot more detail.
I haven't looked all the way through this. I'm gonna pause this here, and I'll have a quick flick through it and see what else I can find. Oh yes, that was it. Ben said that he chooses to, when it comes to Roswell, he chooses to believe Dr. Jesse Marcel and his son.
This is a bit of derogatory. I choose to believe Dr. Jesse Marcel. Well, it's Jesse Marcel Senior, who was not a doctor. Dr. Jesse Marcel Junior is the son of Jesse Marcel Senior, who was the man who came forward in 1978 and spoke to Stanton Friedman. Okay, but I'll carry on. We'll carry on.
Other than Mac Brazel, the guy that actually found it.
Well, I don't choose to believe one instead of the other, and I'll explain why. I will go through this.
Now, Jesse Marcel was not a doctor. He was, I think he was a major in military intelligence.
He was. Yeah, I never said he was a doctor. It's his son who was a doctor. His son, Jesse Marcel Jr., was a doctor all his life, and in fact, he came out of retirement to work as a combat medic attached to a helicopter squadron in the Iraq War, and it was soon after that he died. He was 70. He was one of the oldest men serving in that war.
And he was known for telling tall tales. He told people he was a decorated combat pilot when he wasn't a pilot at all. And Doctor.
Source, please. Is this true? Did Jesse Marcel, was he a bit of a Walter Mitty? Did he lie about his military service? That is what you're accusing him of. That's a very serious accusation, Steve. Do you have any evidence for that? Because I mean, I've never met Jesse Marcel Senior. He died in the early 1980s when I was a little kiddie, and I knew nothing about UFOs in those days. But I know people who've met him. I've spoken to people who worked with him, and he did a very, very noble and brave thing coming forward. He had nothing to gain by saying what he did to Friedman. Nothing to gain at all. He didn't want people to remember him as some nutjob who made up a story about UFOs. He was trying to clear his name because 31 years earlier he'd been humiliated in front of the world. Like, you don't do that by making up stories. You do that by accepting you made a mistake at the time, which he could have done if he really had made a mistake, and that would have been the end of it, and we'd never hear anything more about it. And he would have lived his life in perfect peace and quiet. And there'd be no more trouble. But he didn't do that. Why would he do that? Why would Jesse Marcel Senior suddenly come forward when he was very old and he was actually pretty sick and knew he was going to die within a couple of years, approach a ufologist at a conference and say, oh, by the way, he go to a UFO conference, meet Stanton Friedman, and well, it was someone else who put Friedman in touch with Marcel at this conference, but he said, look, Mr. Friedman, we have a man who's handled the debris of UFOs before, and then that's how the whole Roswell story came out. But there's no motive, Steve. There's no motive for Marcel Senior to do this. Because if he hadn't done this, we would never have known anything about it. It would have just been forgotten. It may have been dug up eventually by people going through newspaper archives and come across the Roswell incident and maybe made some speculation. But the actual story would never have become what it is today unless if Marcel hadn't done that. So he was remembered as the man who either was a complete nutter and couldn't get over it, or was a whistleblower within the UFO community and be revered. Which would you choose, Steve, if you were in that position? Would you make this stuff up? I'll just carry on.
Jesse Marcel was Jesse Marcel's son, or Dr. Marcel was Jesse Marcel's son. He became a medical doctor later in life, so he's not going to know anything about any kind of technology, is he? And
well, why not? I mean, he can learn about these things. I mean, you don't have to know anything about technology to recognise the strange properties of this material we're talking about. Okay, you don't have to be an engineer or a metallurgist to know that it's a tin foil when you fold it up and it creases and then it opens out by itself and then the creases disappear.
And he was about 7 years old at the time, so Ben is just as guilty as this other chap of picking. He cherry picks what he wants to tell you.
I'm not cherry picking, Steve. I've explained to you. I mean, I've looked at both. I'll say a bit more about Mac Brazel in a minute, but Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. Was 7. He was, I believe actually he was 8 years old, if I remember correctly, when his father basically came home one day and said, I've just seen pieces of a flying saucer crash, and here they are. And he basically opened his bag and tipped them out onto the kitchen table at home. And his wife, I think it was quite late at night, he actually got them out of bed and he said, come down and have a look at this. And he showed them to Jesse Jr. and said, look son, can you believe this? Flying saucers are real, we got the evidence. And then that was before the cover-up. This was before the newspaper situation came out and the two news stories came out. The first one saying Roswell, RAF captures a flying disc. The next one, General Ring empties Roswell saucer. Jesse Marcel Jr., I never met him unfortunately, but he did speak at conferences all his life, and now his daughter is now speaking at conferences, and they all support Jesse Jr. has always supported his father. Jesse, what's her name? His daughter. She supports her grandfather. They're all behind him. The Marcel family, all behind what the statement made by Jesse Senior in '78 to Stanton Friedman, and what the resulting evidence that came from that.
Anything that fits Ben's story, he cherry picks.
Nonsense.
So he completely ignores Brazel's statement.
No, I don't ignore it. Shut up.
Who's clearly not describing any kind of alien spacecraft. And he decides to go with the fanciful yarn generated by...
There's a reason why Brazel might have changed his story, actually. We're going to come to that in a minute.
Jesse Marcel. Okay, well, let's see what other pearls of...
Now, I'll come to this now, actually. Mac Brazel, there's a reason why Mac Brazel might have changed his story. Mac Brazel did approach the authorities with this material, and that is how Jesse Marcel Sr. actually got to see this material, and he then said that it was part of a flying saucer. It was not something that he recognised. As an intelligence officer for the 509th Very Heavy Bombardment Group, he would recognise the debris of almost any aircraft on Earth. So, even the government now admit the weather balloon thing was crap. Okay, no one denies that the weather balloon story was a cover-up. The question is, what were they covering up? Now, there's excuse me. Brazel came forward, and that's when Marcel recognised that this was not something made of this Earth, and said so. He then, that was when there was the press release. It was approved by Colonel Blanchard, the base commandant, through Lieutenant Walter Hout, who was the base press officer, who himself confessed that he lied because he confessed that he was involved in this cover-up, which took place that very day. And it was after that, the newspaper is July the 9th, the following day, is the date of the news broadcast, or the actual newspaper interview with Mac Brazel saying he found rubber bands and sticky tape. Now, according to Mumbling, Mr. Mumbling, I cherry pick my data. I ignore the evidence that I don't support. I ignore the evidence that contradicts my worldview. Right? This is what he's saying, and I only support the evidence that supports my worldview. Okay, I'm so good at cherry picking, apparently, right? If I'm so good at cherry picking, how come I go back to original source data? Okay, which is what I do. This here is the definitive Roswell book. This is the book that created the Roswell culture in the world. If it weren't for this book, we wouldn't know anything about it, or hardly anything about it. This is the Charles Berlitz, who wrote a lot about the paranormal. He wrote about Atlantis. He wrote about the Bermuda Triangle. This is what he wrote with Bill Moore, William Moore. William Moore actually, well, you could say a lot about him because he made a lot of bad decisions in his life, including getting involved with disinformation. That's a long story, but that doesn't discredit his contribution to this book. It was actually a few years later that William Moore actually was recruited by the government to spread disinformation. But this is the Roswell incident. From the best-selling author. Here we are, July 1947 at Roswell, New Mexico. A UFO crashed to Earth. Okay, this is a 1982 edition, published by Granada. So it's not a first edition, unfortunately, but it hasn't been. You see, first published in Great Britain by Granada in 1980. So this is the 1982 edition. This is just 2 years later. This is probably a second edition. So let's just talk about. Let's go to the page 82. Right. This is how good I am at cherry picking, Steve. It talks. Well, I won't read it out verbatim. You can check this out. There's probably a PDF of this online because this is the original Roswell book. But it talks about Mac Brazel and about what happened later on, about his family. Now we've got to remember that Mac Brazel was never interviewed by Friedman or any of the investigators. Brazel died in 1963. His wife died in 1975, so neither of them were alive at the time when everything went public. However, where are we here? Where is it? Oh, I found it online here as well. Here we go. They now what happened was he approached. There's been several interviews with Brazel. There's no records of these, unfortunately, but he did an interview on KGRA. That is say KGFL, KGRA, something else. KGFL, the major. This is the major radio station for the area. He apparently did several interviews with someone called Frank Joyce, who did confirm that he had interviewed. Frank Joyce was alive when the researchers began with their work, and he did confirm that he had interviewed Mac Brazel, and Brazel had talked about what he'd found. Unfortunately, like I said, this was a long time ago. Memories were confused, so we don't know exactly what he said, but he did come out and say that there was nothing aliens about this. However, he said when he described what we saw, he didn't say that it was definitively an alien. Now he was arrested. Okay, this was because what happened was in 1997 there was a revelation apparently that the whole Roswell incident thing had been caused by. The whole book was written about this. And oh dear, mine! It looks like I'm going to have to tell you about the book in a minute because you know what? The film chip has almost run out, so I'll be back in a couple of seconds for you and a couple of minutes for me. Okay, so look, I've got a new memory chip in now, new memory film chip, and yeah, here's here's the detail. I found it online. You can actually, well, I don't want to be a pirate here, but I'll read it off the screen anyway. In addition to the first person interview of Brazel at the Roswell Daily Record, we know of 3 other interviews. The first was done on the spur of the moment by Roswell Daily Records, Roswell radio station KGFL announcer Frank Joyce on Sunday the 6th of July. It happened, Brazel was in Sheriff Wilcox's office at the time relating his discovery of strange debris. Remember that even afterwards, on July the 9th, Brazel admitted that what he found didn't look like any weather balloon, so maybe he was just trying to hint, and he was just trying to drop hints that he'd lied in the interview, or that the General Ramey empties Roswell saucer of the Roswell Daily Record that was actually printed, it was actually published the day before, was a lie. Here we go. The second instance was an interview conducted at the home of Walter Whitmore, the owner of KGFL. This was probably done late on Monday, July the 7th. The interview was recorded on a wire recorder, which was the technology available at the time. It was meant to be aired as a scoop, but never played on the air. The recording was lost to us because it was confiscated by the army on the afternoon of July the 8th. Well, of course it would be, wouldn't it? Because that was when they were bringing out. This is when they brought out the cover story. The afternoon of July the 8th was when they were basically trying to stamp down on the flying disc story that had come out earlier in the day. So yeah, they wanted to kill the original disc retrieval story, remove all contrary evidence. The third and last interview was conducted by an El Paso radio station. That's Texas, some distance away. We know only that it took place. We can only guess that Brazel repeated the story he gave the RDR. Yeah. Based on our investigations and reasonable deduction, it seems almost certain that only the Joyce and Whitmore interviews presented Brazel's story in an honest and undistorted fashion. At some point on the 7th to the 8th of July, Brazel was placed in military custody at the base. His statements during this period are therefore suspect and may be the result of coercion. So he was arrested. Mike Brazel was arrested. He was not arrested by the police. He was arrested by the Roswell Army Air Force. Not because he committed any crime. Why was he arrested? What on what charge? I mean, you know, under habeas corpus, the army can't do that, can it? Can it? Oh, our goal of the investigation has been to determine why he alone among Roswell witnesses was detained by the military, and he talks more about his harassment and things like that. He was given a very, very tough time, but some of his family have spoken out. The details are all in here and in lots of other publications that have come since. This is not cherry picking, Steve. I looked at both sides in this. The reason I think that an extraterrestrial spacecraft crashed at Roswell doesn't come from just reading what I want to read. It comes from reading both sides of the story. I've been to skeptic events about this. I've read Carl Flock's Case Closed, or what's it called, Inconvenient Facts. I know the point you're making because I've looked at what the skeptics say about this. You cannot accuse me of cherry picking. That's very dishonest of you. I think I'll carry on here.
Wisdom we can glean from this latest Ben video.
Ben video.
Okay, I just moved it on a little bit.
The wisdom you can glean, yes. And I know you're being sarcastic, but some people think it's true, Steve.
I've got to go forward a little bit. 22:15. I know for a couple of minutes.
I don't know what he's talking about now.
Obvious horseshit. Why? I would love to be...
This is Sargon just saying it's obvious horse shit.
Stephen's accounted.
This is me reporting on what Sargon was saying.
I think I would love to believe that it was real, but I don't think he does. I think he seems to be suffering from a bit of sort of wishful thinking here.
As I said, Carl, Sargon of Akkad, was suffering from wishful thinking, and he was. I think he doesn't want to believe this is real. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here, I've already covered this on the other video, but Sargon used to be a conspiracy theorist. He used to be on our side before he became a skeptic. So he's a convert the skeptic movement made. He went from being one of us to being like a skeptic, and then from a skeptic to being one of these kind of new people who are taking sides in this skeptic civil war that I talked about in my skeptic video, which is linked below in the description box. And I actually I mentioned Sargon's name in that video several times because I respect what he's done in many ways in that particular situation. So I'm not anti-Sargon at all. Anyway, I'm not anti-Steve Mumbling either. I'm just correcting things, Steve, the same way I corrected Sargon.
These things aren't true.
Yeah, actually, Ben, I would like to believe it as well, but you've got to look at everything. You cherry pick.
Hang on, you'd like to believe that these things weren't true, because that was the point I was making to Sargon. I thought Sargon was wishful thinking that UFOs weren't true. Are you saying you'd like to believe UFOs weren't true, or did you just mishear me, Steve? Please clarify.
The bits that fit. Even
I don't
when
cherry pick.
They're quite preposterous. So just again with the Roswell story, you completely discard Matt Brazel's statement.
For the third time, no, I don't. I've just explained why.
The fellow that found the debris, and you go with this other the other nonsensical story. The other thing too is that you've got to think logically. Which is more.
You're telling me that I have to think logically?
likely?
Ah,
You know, is it in the case of Roswell? Is it more likely using Occam's razor?
Ah,
You know,
yes.
the simplest answer is often the right one, or usually the right one. That Mac Brazel found this debris. It was tinfoil. It was balsa wood
I'm going to let him carry on to the end. I'm looking forward to this.
sticks. There were balloon strings. Carrying military and scientific instrumentation launched from just up the road from Roswell. So it's not. It wouldn't have looked like a weather balloon, because a weather balloon is just one balloon, little package under it. These.
All right, I'm just going to point out something. Right, he's referring here to the official cover story of Roswell, which was released in 1997. The government, after lying to us at least 3 times, finally came forward and said, well, it was something called Project Mogul. But don't worry, this time we're telling you the truth. Honest. Project Mogul was an electronic intelligence operation. Now, this wasn't publicly known at the time, but secretly the US government knew that the Soviet Union was developing an atomic bomb, and they were literally only a couple of months behind the Americans. The public thought that America alone had the atomic bomb, and that's the way it would stay, whereas the Russians were already working on it. They captured some of the Nazi scientists. They had spies all over the Manhattan Project. You know, people like Klaus Fuchs and Klaus Fuchs, sorry. Sounded rude, didn't it? And the Julius Ethel Rosenberg and people like that. They were gathering this information, and they were on the verge of testing. By 1947, they actually detonate their first bomb in 49, but the Americans thought they might do as early as 47. So they were sending up this thing called Project Mogul, and Project Mogul involves the launch of the biggest unmanned balloon ever built. I think it's about 1,000 feet tall, and it contains a massive amount of highly classified electronic equipment designed to pick up very low frequency sound waves, infrasound. These things that are actually produced only by nuclear explosions. And the government said, well, this is what it was all that time. This is what it was, and this is what we were covering up. It wasn't aliens. Yes, there was a cover-up. We wanted to cover something up because something very, very highly secretive we were doing, but it wasn't aliens. And of course, that's what Mac Brazel. Yes. Mac Brazel would have looked at that and not necessarily recognised it as a weather balloon, and he said it wasn't a weather balloon. Fair enough. But he took the debris, which would include equipment that he wasn't familiar with, material that he wasn't familiar with, to the police. And now, for Jesse Marcel, he would have been familiar with that. I'm not saying that Marcel was briefed into Project Mogul. He wouldn't have been, because it was produced on a completely need-to-know basis. But he would have recognised that this was something man-made. He would have known immediately the kind of thing it was, and he would have probably just kept his mouth shut. He'd have realised this was some kind of government secret experiment involving some kind of electronic listening device. He would have recognised that, and as an intelligence officer in the Army Air Force, he would have recognised that, and he would have just taken it into the base and told everyone not to speak about it. He certainly would have taken it home and showed his wife and kids. I'm just going to carry on now, because he just to recap, Steve is about to hit me with the Occam's razor line. Sorry, I stopped recording there. I actually meant to press play on the player, but he's about to hit me with the Occam's razor line.
Balloon strings, like the Mogul balloon strings or similar, were half a dozen of these balloons. It could have been 600 feet long. He
didn't find any strings. He found eyelets, no strings.
The entire tethered string. Is it more likely that one of those came down in Brazel's field, or is it more likely that an alien spacecraft came down in Brazel's field, especially an alien spacecraft made of balsa wood sticks and tin foil? And I think he said he gathered it all up and put it on his kitchen table, and the whole lot weighed about 10 pounds. I mean, the story's just got exaggerated out of all proportion. So
well, like I said, Marcel would not have taken it home if he thought it was made in this earth. If he thought it was something produced by the government, he would not have taken it home.
You're selecting what you want, Ben. You're doing exactly what you're accusing this fella of doing.
Not true.
I'll just pause that again.
No. So, Occam's razor. All things being equal, the most likely solution is usually the right one. That is correct, and I explain this in my Skeptic video, so do go and watch that. It's a problem-solving exercise, which means if you want to solve a problem, always go for the most likely explanation first. And that makes perfect sense if you're dealing with known systems. So, for example, if your radio breaks down, try changing the batteries before you open it up and stick a screwdriver in and start filling with its innards. Okay? Because flat batteries is by far the most likely reason to explain your radio's malfunction. Now, that works well within known systems because we know how radios work, you see. But when it comes to unknown systems, Occam's razor is not applicable because we can't assign a hierarchy of likelihoods in the case that Steve wants us to assign them. He says, well, which is more likely? Is it a balloon from some secret project, Project Mogul, or is it some alien craft that crashed on Brazel's ranch in the field? To answer that question, we need to know how often extraterrestrial craft visit the Earth, if at all, and how often secret government listening experiments are launched, and we don't know because to this day stuff that was done at White Sands missile range is not necessarily known. At the same time, we do have something of a record of UFO visitation. We're not entirely sure. We're not entirely sure how many of these things are real or how many things are explicable. So we're dealing with unknown quantities here, and it's wrong to try and assign a hierarchy of likelihoods here. You're fooling yourself, Steve. This is the thing. You think you know because you already have a priori dismissal of the UFO phenomenon, and certainly the Roswell phenomenon. I know you bring up UFOs again in a minute, which I'm going to come to. But to quote the Right Honourable Paul Hellyer MP, who was some loony with a tinfoil hat standing on a hillside with a telescope pointing at the sky. Well, actually he wasn't. He was the Minister of Defence for Canada and he was a former engineer. He said, UFOs are as common as the aircraft that fly above our heads. It's a qualitative statement, but again, if you apply that to the other qualitative statements you made, Occam's razor could just as easily suggest that it's more likely that Brazel picked up the remains of an extraterrestrial craft as he picked up the remains of a Project Mogul balloon.
Just moved on a little bit further. Sorry about the camera being shaky, but I'm trying to hold it in my left hand while I operate the computer with my right hand.
Get yourself a tripod, Steve. It's much easier. Or get some kind of screen cap software. Probably that you don't necessarily need that. I mean, screen cap software you have to. I don't think there's any free apps. You have to buy one, and sometimes if it's not something you're going to use very often, it's not worth it. But if you're going to do regular videos, I recommend getting a screen cap software. I don't have one because I don't use it often enough, and I find simply inserting clips much easier. But in these reply videos, what you're doing is probably the best way you're doing it. You just might find it easier if you get yourself a tripod which you can point at the screen, which is what he's doing. It's basically a screen over of this particular video. So get a tripod, just maybe one of those small tripods you can put on your desk.
As I'm just sitting in my comfy chair in front of the big screen at the moment, but just thought I'd have a very quick look at this.
Steve, you've got the TV playing in the background. You're not even concentrating, mate. You're watching some guitar band. Australian television is notoriously awful, and when I was actually in Australia, I remember I hardly watched bloody telly because it was so bad. It's even worse than British telly, and that's gone downhill really badly lately.
Okay, so let's see what else Ben's got to say.
That's how we wanted it. Okay. Contracts obtained by the Times show congressional appropriation of just under 20 million in the beginning of late 2008 through 2011. Man, I wish I could get 20 million.
Talking about
shit about aliens.
He's talking about Bob Bigelow and the debris.
You talk what you call shit about aliens. Most people don't get that. So.
No, I mean, obviously if they put 22 million in the pot for this...
Well, now, right, sorry, I know where he's going with this now. He's, oh, by the way, just to trigger Steve even worse, this is what I'm using to cover my water jug at the moment. David Icke, freedom or fascism, don't you choose. It's probably poisoning the water I'm drinking, Steve. It's probably making me crazier because I'm like ingesting it. Now we talk. This is where we bring up the subject of. I paused him in mid-sentence. Sorry, Steve, but we bring up the subject of the secret UFO project that the government have just come out and talked about. So I'll let Steve talk. He just mentioned it's 22 million US dollars, 15 million pounds per year was spent on this between 2007 and 2012. And this is why Sargon did this video. This video, I wouldn't even abduct you. It's because this is what inspired him to do it. And this is what inspired me to reply. So Steve, it's just, I'll go back slightly actually. Here we go.
You talk what you call shit about aliens. You don't get. Most people don't get that. Something.
No, I mean, obviously, if they put 22 million...
He's giving it... Steve is giving it consideration. They put 22 million in the pot, he says.
In the pot for this, for investigating unidentified flying objects. They were interesting enough to spend 22 million on.
Yeah,
these unidentified aerial phenomenon. I mean, I don't doubt this. Some of this stuff is this stuff is going on. I think there's probably about 1% wheat amongst all this absolute rubbish that you see on the internet about ET and aliens and people being abducted and all this sort of stuff.
So, Steve, are you saying you accept that there is a genuine mystery behind the UFO phenomenon and that some of them can't be explained as weather balloons and marsh gas and things like that? Is that what you're saying? I'll let him continue. I mean, he makes several points in this particular segment of the video, but I'll let him carry on.
I do believe there's something to it.
You do? Right. Well, that's sensible of you.
I happen to personally know a couple of ex-airline pilots, and they both tell me that there's something to it.
They will. People like pilots will tell you this privately sometimes, but they won't necessarily come out with it publicly. And this takes me back to how secrets are kept, which we brought up at the beginning.
One of them was an ex-Royal Air Force fighter pilot. So people that people that I think are credible are telling me personally that there is something to it. Machines, vehicles, demonstrating operational capabilities beyond anything we could make here on Earth.
It sounds like you're doing a backflip now, Steve, because now you're saying you think the phenomenon is real. So you're sort of like agreeing with me now.
It's interesting stuff. But when it comes to people being abducted and alien spacecraft crashing on Earth, I think that's all nonsense. To be perfectly honest, I don't believe that for a minute. I certainly don't believe that into the Roswell story.
This is strange. So you don't accept abductions. You don't accept crash retrievals. You accept the UFO phenomenon is real. You've spoken yourself personally to people who have witnessed this, people in positions to witness this, pilots. A lot of UFO witnesses are pilots for obvious reasons because they're up there flying and they're looking around. You then say that you don't believe abductions. Okay, well that's a subject I know you're going to bring up again, and perhaps I'll say more about it then. I think you're wrong. As for crash retrievals, well, firstly, Roswell is not the only one. You say 99% of the shit on the internet. Well, not all of it is. I mean, you've got to deal with these cases one case at a time. Putting a figure on it and saying 99% of it is rubbish is not an argument. Well, as I said, we could go into other examples of possible and I think probable crash retrievals events, because these things do sometimes come down. They do sometimes come to grief on the Earth's surface. For whatever reason, like every other mechanical device, they're fallible. And the beings inside them are fallible. These are not gods. These are biological entities with engineered objects. However sophisticated they are, they do fail. There's no sliding scale of reliability which eventually converges when it comes to advancement. Okay, they may become parallel. They may be a parallel situation where things which are very advanced become very reliable, but they never converge into 100% reliability. Well, so we should anticipate crash retrievals on a theoretical level if you accept that the UFO phenomenon is real and that some of these things are not of this world. So why don't you? As for the abductions, well, maybe we'll say more about that later. You're wrong about the abductions. There's some very, very credible cases. We'll just carry on.
Just continue a little bit further.
Unless anyone wants to send me $20 million US dollars, please do.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you send Ben $20 million, he's just going to tell you that the Roswell incident was real. I don't know whether he's going to stretch that out to his crazy 9/11 theories.
All right, so we're now bringing in the crazy 9/11 theories. Send me $20 million. and I'll just tell you the Roswell incident is real. Is that so, Steve? Well, again, you're making a lot of assumptions about me, and very convenient assumptions, I might add, because you want to say that you want to make an ad hominem assault on me now, which is that's extremely juvenile. It's very bad practice, and well, I'll maybe on your other videos I'll be able to do maybe edit my own contribution through timestamps or whatever. So I don't have to actually deal with this continuously.
I was watching a video the other day and Ben was saying, oh yeah, well the 9/11, it was an inside job. The buildings were brought down by a directed energy weapon.
Correct.
And not only was it they brought down by a directed energy weapon, they were brought down by a directed energy weapon powered by free energy. I mean, what the hell? What's next?
Yes, I mean the Hutchison effect. Please do read Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? She's a mechanical engineer, professor of mechanical engineering. She studied this in very, very great detail. It's a completely correctly formatted scientific study of the 9/11 attack from the point of view of the destruction of the World Trade Center. Okay, she's done lots of lectures. She's looked into this. She's been working with John Hutchison, the man who carried out interference experiments using electromagnetic fields and found that they released energy from somewhere. If it's not coming from the plug and it's not coming from a petrol tank, then where's it coming from? You scoff at this. Maybe you've done another video about this and in more detail, and I'll be able to tackle this in more detail. I'm quite enjoying these replying to you, actually, Steve. It's quite fun. But yes, I do believe that is the case, and you shouldn't scoff about it. So anyway, he says something else. Listen to this.
It was brought down by a directed energy weapon powered by free energy from an ET craft. Where's that story going? Absolute nonsense. Of course, we all know exactly what happened with 9.
No, I don't know if you're just not clarifying, or you're not giving enough details, or you're just trying to misrepresent me again. Are you suggesting that it was free energy from an ET craft, and in other words, an ET craft wielded the directed energy weapon? Because I've never said that. What I just said was it's possible that study of the debris of incidences where extraterrestrial artifacts come to grief on the Earth's surface and are secretly salvaged by the government. Study of that debris might result in the discovery of this system, because the propulsion systems and power plants of these artifacts are obviously not something that we use on this Earth. They're not flying across the universe on Texaco unleaded 4-star. So I did say that it's possible that some of the weapons that were used, which were wielded, which is provable, against the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, might have come from one of these studies. That's what I actually said. I didn't say definitely. I said it was possible. There's probably several sources for free energy, and indeed the program to weaponize it.
9/11, because
Sorry, he's going to say we know what happened on 9/11 now.
of us witnessed it live on TV as it was unfolding.
Right, so you watched it on TV, so therefore you know what caused it. I watched it on TV. I didn't jump to the conclusion that it was an inside job when I first saw it. I was just shocked and horrified like everyone else. But so you saw it on TV, therefore you know what caused it.
Hijacked aircraft and flew them into the buildings. It's as simple as that. There's no, you can weave it into any kind of yarn you like.
No, they did not. There was no. Where's the evidence? You know what you were told through the news. You know what was told on telly by the Bush and Blair and those people. You know that, but you don't know. You can't possibly say that this is a source to back up the official story. That's completely wrong. That's totally illogical.
Dramatic effect, but that's what happened. Some guys hijacked some planes and flew them into some buildings.
Some of them are still alive.
Anyway, I'm going off at a tangent here.
Did they parachute from the plane?
He's not as bad.
Did they parachute from the plane, Steve? Is that? I honestly thought that was going to come out. Yeah. Now, sorry, I'll let Steve carry on because he is going off at a tangent, so I've sort of followed him. But hopefully, he's going to get back into the circle of what he's talking about.
Bad as Miles, I don't think quite.
He just said I wasn't as mad as Miles Johnston. Is that a compliment or an insult? Miles, what do you think?
But Ben is another channel that I look at, mainly, well, for amusement, really, for entertainment. I don't really take anything serious.
Well, you see, again, if it entertains you, Steve, well, I'm pleased. You know, I do aim to entertain as well as enlighten. And if only get half of those things, well, 1 out of 2 is not bad, as as you might have heard.
Seriously, that I see on there, but Ben's always good for a bit of a chuckle over, you know, coffee and some chocky digestives.
Yeah,
I think I'm more kind of like evening meal and white wine sort of person, quite frankly.
Today button on the Pano TV blog.
Oh yeah, it's okay. I'll pause that there. Okay,
I'm not sure what point he's making.
Research and assessments of the threat posed by the objects. If anyone wants to list Bigelow's company.
Yeah, okay. We're putting 22 million in the pot to assess whether these.
Okay, so he's talking about. Sargon is talking about the budget now for this particular event. I'm about to reply to him, and then Steve's about to reply to me.
Things are, you know, a threat. I think that's fair enough. You know, because you know, they've been tracked on radar.
Well,
military pilots have seen them. Something is going on.
Yeah.
So putting 22 million in the pot to try and find out what it is, I think is perfectly reasonable.
Well, you see, we agree on that, okay? But I think the point is here that the US government has put 22 million in the pot to investigate something which they have told us they don't take seriously. If, in fact, we know this is the case because they actually made a statement in 2011 following the second White House petition that was organised by Grant Cameron, which I signed, a lot of other people did, where they actually stated this. They said that the US government stopped investigating UFOs in 1969 with the closure of Project Blue Book, and has not had any interest in the subject since because they believe there's nothing really there to see. That's their statement. They said there's no evidence that we're being visited by any non-human intelligence, so therefore we're not going to waste our time and money on it. This is just 2 years after they had a bloody 5-year mission with, sorry, I'm getting Star Trekky now, a 5-year mission to, I mustn't say it, to investigate these objects with paying $22 million a year, which is what it costs. They got Senator Harry Reid and this guy Louis Elizondo from the Department of Defense. They even brought in Bob Bigelow. That's a very elaborate thing. I mean, Steve actually agrees here. He accepts that it's justified. But you see, Steve, the US government is saying these things don't exist. This is the same government that's told us the truth about Roswell. So why do you accept one half of this scenario and not the obvious implications, both in terms of the possibility of crash retrievals and that the government would then suppress these crash retrievals? I've explained in my various videos on this subject exactly why I think any terrestrial authorities would actually keep these things quiet.
Yeah, here we go. Bigelow Aerospace.
Bigelow Aerospace.
Bigelow Aerospace. I think Bigelow made his money with real estate, and everybody knows real estate agents make their money with bullshit. Now, I haven't researched Bigelow, but you know, would you trust a real estate salesman? Would you?
Let's go to Rob. Let's go to his Wikipedia page. Here we go. Robert Bigelow. Born May 12, 1945, American business. He owns a hotel chain, Las Vegas, Nevada. He grew up in. Okay, that's a bad thing because Las Vegas, of course, is the land of amusements. Yeah, commercial real estate, hotels, motels, and apartments. Okay, that's true. He did. Okay, so that's fair enough. But then, so did Trump. I mean, Trump was essentially an estate agent too. But it goes on to talk about his Bigelow Aerospace and where he gets into space exploration, and then NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science, which studies fringe science, paranormal topics, ufology, etc. And as I explain in my video at Stargon, Bob Bigelow is actually a very, very, very important figure. He's a great guy. He's a philanthropist who's funded a lot of these research projects, which we otherwise have to scrimp and save for. Yeah, here we go.
Trust a second-hand car salesman. I personally wouldn't.
But
Okay, but again, this is an ad hominem. Okay, just because he's an estate agent And of course you have to get people to buy houses, so you say, it's got a wonderful, very comfortable toilet here, you know. It's got a lot of fresh air you get when you're in the toilet, so it won't smell. What they don't mean, what they mean by that is it's actually an outdoor bog in the garden. You see what I mean? So yeah, I know they are estate agents, are salesmen, but I think you are to use that as a reason to disbelieve Bob Bigelow's work on the paranormal. Is again, it's another sneer, it's another ad hominem, it's poisoning the well, it's all those things, and it's not a good practice to do these when you're trying to put together a rational case. It's a fallacy, Steve. It is a fallacy, and I ask you to avoid it in the future.
Under his direction, the company modified buildings in Las Vegas from storage of metal alloys.
Can't hear what Sargon's saying now.
Yeah. So Bigelow Aerospace modified buildings for the storage of materials from alien spacecraft. Now, I don't believe that.
Well, why not? I mean, if Bob Bigelow was actually recruited by this project, why wouldn't he modify some of his assets, some of his buildings, as a result? Because you would probably need to, because you may need special storage facilities. You may need decontamination facilities. You might need to put them into hermetically sealed chambers in order to, because of the possibility of infection, things like that. We're dealing with materials that are very often not known, in the sense that they are very often identifiable in terms of their elements. But for instance, you get metals which are alloys which you don't actually get made, which are not found. What's the word? They're not produced in any foundry. Things like that.
I can't imagine what sort of modifications you might need to make. Certainly if you really had recovered materials from alien spacecraft, you wouldn't be telling people where they are, because...
Well, they didn't tell them where they are. Bob Bigelow would have signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of this, I'm sure, and he hasn't said anything before all this came out. Okay, but so there'd been security. There would have been a security issue as well, which you'd also need to modify the premises for.
Supposing I was an eccentric multi-millionaire, and I might even have a small private army that I make money out of by.
That's what you mean, like mercenaries? Yeah, and
doing jobs in Africa and places like that. And I might say to my chaps, okay guys, got a little job for you this week. I want you to go to this particular building. Well, when you just do a bit of research, there's a few buildings owned by Bigelow Aerospace around Las Vegas.
That's true.
Supposedly there's some recovered alien material there. I'd like you to find out which building it's in, which buildings it's in. Go and get me a couple of samples. There's a bit of a bonus in it for you. There'll be people like that out there.
One thing about it is, first of all, the eccentric millionaire you're talking about, who wants to actually steal some of this, that's what he's talking about. He's basically saying that another eccentric millionaire would try and steal some of the stuff that Bob Bigelow has. And well, firstly, you've got to assume that this eccentric millionaire, this person who wants to steal it, would know that it existed. And obviously there's a lot of covert material here. There's, as I say, secrecy and security. This would be an issue. And secondly, you assume that Bigelow and the people he's working for, in other words the US Department of Defense, would not take steps themselves to protect these premises. I mean, personally, I think what he's suggesting here is that you would actually, if this was actually going on, you would actually move this material. It wouldn't be kept in one of the Bigelow Aerospace facilities. It would be moved, say, to Area 51 or to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to a secure military facility. Well, it depends. That's actually a good question. I'll let him continue actually, because that's actually a good question.
So that, I think, personally, is ridiculous.
I think that's what he's suggesting. He stopped now. I think that's what he's suggesting, but it's a good question. But we don't know exactly what security measures were taken at the Bigelow Aerospace facilities. We don't know that. We don't know what the decision process was to actually perhaps house this material there, as opposed to on Area 51. We also don't know exactly what kind of material was housed there. It may have just been little slivers of metal, nothing decisive. It doesn't mean that Bigelow had like frozen alien bodies and like entire like crashed saucers in there. Though things like that may well have been put onto a higher level of security protection. Okay, so without that information, we can't say whether or not it is ridiculous.
Copernicus is something recovered from an unidentified aerial phenomena.
He didn't actually say that. Mr. Elizondo avoided the question when he was asked that the other day. He was asked if they have any physical, material, and he said, "Oh, well, they do leave residue, like electromagnetic residue, this, that, and the other." And he gave a politician's answer. He went off at a tangent, and he didn't answer the question.
That's true. That's true. That's actually true. However, it's possible. I mean, as a Pentagon official, it may have been a question beyond his remit. However, we know that he was actually a spokesman for this actually revelation that this project existed. We know that. We also know that the pilot in the film, the so-called Tic Tac footage, the pilot involved in that particular film, I talked about this in the live stream, he was allowed to approach the media. Once that film was declassified, he was allowed to approach the media. He was allowed to say that what he saw, what he thought it was not part of this world. He was allowed to say that he was just one part of a study, or one part of an interception that had been going on for several weeks. So the US government had been aware of objects in that area, craft, for several weeks before he was actually sent up there with the other pilot to actually investigate. So, yeah, I know there may be all kinds of reasons why Luis Elizondo may not be able to confirm or deny, etc., etc. But this is not evidence that oh well, he's therefore saying it's not really UFOs, it's not really aliens. No, it's not. From what we've seen of the other revelations, the actual stream, the general trend where we're taking this here, is actually leading towards it being extraterrestrial, regardless of what Elizondo himself said in that radio interview with Cheryl Costa and Leslie Kane.
Rings of the Lost Ark, isn't it?
Oh, by the way, Steve, I do recommend you read Leslie Kane's book on UFOs. Generals and pilots and etc. go on the record. It's a long, I can't remember the exact title. It's got a long title, but it actually documents. It doesn't speculate at all in that book about what the phenomena is at all. It's not really a ufological book as such. But it makes it unmistakable that the US government's position on this phenomenon is there. It documents it in meticulous detail. Leslie Kane has done meticulous detail that the US government had an interest in this. They had a project on it, and there were many situations where they've admitted it.
Well, researchers also study people who said they have experienced physical...
Raiders of the Lost Ark is an interesting film. All those...
No, I mentioned that Raiders of the Lost Ark is an interesting film. I can't remember exactly what Sargon was saying. I can't hear what Sargon is saying on this soundtrack. But, I'll just...
Well, that series is interesting because... Well, that series is very interesting because they do. I mean, the thing is, this sort of thing is real.
I'm not exactly sure what I said there, but I refer to the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they actually capture the Ark of the Covenant, they lock it up in some warehouse, and it doesn't appear again. It actually appears again in the last Indiana Jones film, the fourth one, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, and that's the only time you hear about it. You find out in that film that it's actually Area 51 where it's stored.
Yeah. In Ben's opinion, this sort of thing is real. Of course, it isn't real.
Well, I don't know exactly what you're referring to, Steve, but I can't remember what Sargon said. But chances are, I mean, I think the point if what I was saying was that some mysterious artifacts are captured and stored, then I disagree. I think it is real. These things do happen. I do recommend. UFO Today by Dr. Irena Scott. This book is different from Leslie Kane's book because it actually is a ufological book. It goes into the evidence. It goes into the fact it's someone who worked in the heart of the military-industrial complex. And please go to her Panmo Radio, because I've interviewed Dr. Scott twice on my radio show. She worked for the Battelle Memorial Institute and how it was connected to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Okay, so this is why I say it's real. I'm not cherry-picking or making it up. This is how I get this information.
It's just, it's great for telling fanciful yarns in the pub, but, you know, the reality...
I hardly ever go to the pub these days, and when I do, I certainly don't tell my normie friends. Well, there's only one I really have. Shows how isolated we are, doesn't it? I do have a friend of a guy who's still a porter, and I sometimes meet up with him. We go to the pub. There's several people I still sort of socialise with, but I certainly don't lecture him or make up yarns or tell even real stories about UFOs. I keep my mouth strictly shut about these subjects because he has no interest in it, and he thinks it's crazy. We talk about completely different subjects. Honestly, do you realise the social deficit and your social market, how your social market value drops when you start talking about this in public? If you're not in the company of other people who are on your level or who have the same interests, you really have no idea, Steve. You need to put yourselves in our shoes and just think about it.
Is far less interesting. That's the bottom line.
It's far less. The truth is far less interesting. Again, there's a bit of like a skeptic bravery kind of thing. I mean, it's not the same as the Materialist Bravery Award, which I talked about in the skeptic video. But it's a kind of, yes, you know, it's less interesting. But you know, I'm so level-headed and pragmatic that I don't need these fantasies to deal with it. I'll have to do some more study in that area. But I think Steve may be vying here. He may be signalling that he wants some kind of pat on the back for bravery and level-headedness in this crazy and world full of people who just make things up.
Effects from encounters with the object and examining for any physiological changes. You know, I've seen a bunch of these videos. I love the way that I see an expert on alien abduction.
Now, Sargon, I can't hear what he's saying.
Well, you're not an expert on alien abductions, otherwise you wouldn't simply...
All right, Sargon says something about alien abductions, and I replied to him in annoyance. Excuse me. I replied to him with a bit of annoyance.
Watch a documentary about Stan Romanek and say, well, he is an example.
That's right, Sargon said earlier on. He held Stan Romanek up as an example of a typical alien abductee researcher or experiencer, which is you can't get more straw manning than that. You couldn't poison the well more than that if you threw 20 tons of botulism into it.
He's a good sort of sample of our community and what we do. You would not do that if you actually knew about alien abductions. You know there are far better cases that you could suggest.
That's true.
For study.
That's what I mean by straw manning. That's what I mean by poisoning the well.
One of the most interesting ones I thought.
Yeah, but you know, I don't think there are any convincing alien abduction stories.
Really? You think not? So the ones that I've talked about, you don't believe? Well, I'd love to know exactly what your criticism is of them. I mean, have you commented? I mean, if you commented under the videos where I discuss these, I'll address your comments case by case.
Not one. I don't believe Whitley Strieber. I think that's just a load of nonsense.
No, Whitley Strieber actually presents, if you listen to his radio show, I think when his wife died he stopped doing it. And I've not actually read his book, but it's pretty clear that what Strieber experienced was absolutely a classic alien abduction experience. And he came out with some things that have been, which in a sense have come up in other cases that were published after Strieber came out. Now, I've got to ask you, Steve, why, if he's making this up, why he was a very successful author. He wrote a couple of horror stories, actually. He wrote one called Wolfen that was made into a film. He wrote several other. He was a successful novelist already, and essentially, his book Communion, it killed his fictional career in a way, and it didn't do him much good financially. It got him a different audience. It didn't necessarily get him a bigger audience or get him an audience with more potential. It's like myself. You said I sell books. I've written my Roswell books. Yeah, I've written 2. I'm writing a 3rd one now. Now, I have the writing abilities. I can write good fiction. Okay. Don't you think that I could write something a little on a different subject and perhaps be more successful? Because believe me, I could. If I wanted to, I could write something a lot more conventional. I could get it put out by a mainstream publisher, and I'd probably be considerably more successful on a financial basis. So why do I write about this? You see, if it's all about sales and it's all about making money, again, it's like the critics of Dawkins. Why do we bother? You know, why don't I sell dodgy double glazing? Why don't I sell used cars? You mentioned, why don't I get into the estate agency business like Bigelow and what bullshit you said? So who at what point, who do you accept who is being paid for what they do, which you accept as not a fraud and not motivated to make things up in order to get paid, Steve? Where's your line drawn? That's what I'm just curious about that. And what makes you turn to someone and respect them for what they do, and not make this accusation against them? I bet you anything it's like skeptic authors. I bet you. And the reason why, even though they're doing exactly the same as I do, because they agree with you, because now you are cherry picking. Isn't that true, Steve?
God, there's so many, isn't there? Yeah, I think
well, in terms of alien abduction experiences, there are several million actually that have been reported. I've met people who have had these experiences. I myself I have an implant in my arm. I don't know how it got. I don't have any memory of any experience that would lead me to believe that it happened, but it has been confirmed by 2 separate scans. There's a mark on my arm on the location. These things are extremely common. It's like I said, we don't have definitive numbers, but if there are 2 million stories out there, even if even 1% of them were true, then we'd be visited constantly every day by craft who'd be taking people for whatever reason, and whoever they are, wherever they come from.
Personally, it may be that I think I've said this before, probably more than once. You know, that if there is something akin to the Galaxy Police, you know, something like the Federation, this is the sort of thing you see in Star Trek. They wouldn't be doing this, but
all right. So because the Galaxy Police, the Federation. Okay, so because in a fictional scenario they're not doing it. You see, this is like people say, well, you know, if I went to another planet, you know, I wouldn't do what aliens do. I mean, why do they do it? Why do they come all the way from Zeta Reticuli? They fly down to Earth, they make some marks in some cornfields, and they abduct some wide-eyed yokel from his home in some little Wiltshire village and insert anal probes into him, and then put him back in his bed without any evidence except the memory of what happened to him. Well, I wouldn't do that if I were an alien. So obviously the aliens aren't doing it. Well, that is anthropomorphizing. That's assuming they're going to think like we do. You're kind of putting yourselves. I don't think we put themselves in the alien shoes if they've even got 2 feet. I don't think we can put ourselves in their shoes like that. That's not a very, very good assessment for dismissing this phenomenon.
They might be keeping an eye on developing technologies, developing species
Well, they are.
Developing technologies that may enable them to go out into space and visit them.
God, I'm only halfway through this. So I'm afraid my reply video to Steve's video is only 32 minutes long. Mine's going to be about, I don't know, 3 times that at this rate. Sorry, but Steve's given me a lot to talk about. Yeah, I think they do monitor developing technologies. Now, one of the behaviour traits of UFOs that they are most commonly associated with is an interest in our nuclear weapons. So, well, I'll let Steve carry on.
And if they are a warlike species, and I've used this example before actually, if Hitler had won the Second World War, and this was the planet Hitler, and it was run by Nazis, you wouldn't want them travelling out into space, because, you know, the people that they come across might be for a very hard time. And it may make sense for an alien species, or several alien species, to be able to develop a bioweapon that would kill every living person on the face of the Earth.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, that's a scenario from science fiction, and yes, I mean, there's some theories which say that because humans are very warlike and we commit inhuman acts against each other, in a sense we're a self-destructive species, that we are in some way being contained. Now there is some evidence to suggest this. Partly the UFO's interest in nuclear weapons, but also some encounters in space. Now there was actually an incident. Dr. Robert Jacobs talks about this, where there was a project. Well, he monitored a missile launch, and this missile was actually a trial run for a space rocket, and it was shot down by a disc-shaped object. Now, there was a project to actually detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon, and it's possible this was a part of it. And the aliens were essentially saying, we don't like you using nuclear weapons, but if you're going to use them, keep them on your own planet. But there was a project to try and detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. I'll try and get the details of that for you, and I think I've discussed it on a previous video anyway.
There wouldn't be a shooting war with aliens. They just spray something into the atmosphere, kill everybody.
Yeah, and they could. I mean, there's no doubt with that kind of technology, they could exterminate us instantly, any time, and they haven't. So, again, this is... You're asking some good questions here, actually, about their motives.
So just neutralise the species, if you like. And in order to do that, they would need to probably get DNA samples from every race on Earth.
Which they may well have done, quite likely, if they're constructing a biological weapon, yes.
And, you know, they'd probably have to abduct people to take those DNA samples.
I don't think... Well, you can get DNA samples from a strand of hair. They just need to... Or a skin cell. They just need to come down and basically follow you around until you shed a fragment of hair or a skin cell, and just pick that up. They wouldn't need to abduct you. This is like the mutilation, the animal mutilation phenomenon. People often say, well, it's some kind of scientific experiment being done by the aliens or the secret government. It doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. But that's a big subject. I don't have time to go into detail here, but I have covered it on previous videos.
So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But I think there'd be...
I'm being more sceptic than Steve now, because I'm saying how his theoretical model would not justify abductions, and Steve is saying it might.
I would say most of these stories that you see on, you know, channels like Miles Johnson's and you know, this other stuff that you see on the internet where people are abducted from their beds, and there's nothing special whatsoever about these people. Why would you want their DNA? Maybe if you were...
Well, again, you're assuming that these stories that Miles brings up on his channels, many of them, they vary actually in quality, but many of them are extremely convincing. And whatever we don't know why these people have been chosen. It's very often people who are chosen, people who report abduction experiences are almost demographic. They're almost demographically homogenous. They're almost an entire cross section of society. There are men and women in equal numbers. They're old and young, they're black and white, they're rich and poor. The phenomenon exists in every country on Earth, among all people of all racial and cultural groups. We don't know why certain people are chosen, some people are not. There appears to be a family connection, so it's possible that they have a fixation on certain bloodlines. It's sometimes a generational thing. Sometimes there's like Jason Andrews, for example. His mother has had experiences, and then so did her father. So it's a kind of her father lived long before the alien abduction culture existed, but it appears to be a family trait. They seem to be following this particular family.
Engineering a bioweapon, that wouldn't really matter. But personally, when it comes to abductions, I would say that maybe but probably 1% of people that claim, maybe less, probably less than 1%.
You said none at all a little while ago. You said it. You've never come across a convincing case. So you're bringing it. It's coming up a little bit now, Steve.
Of people that are claiming they were abducted, would actually be abducted, would have actually had an abduction experience.
Again, if it's even a fraction of the people who've reported experiences, not to mention those that haven't, even if it's only a very small fraction of them, it still means that alien abduction is a very regular phenomenon. It's going on right now to somebody somewhere in the world, more than one person somewhere in the world.
Excuse me. Okay, I'll pause it again.
It's over an hour, this thing, so I try not to. I'm being selective about what I.
I was going to get into psychic stuff and remote viewing, which is absolute garbage.
Right, so we have an a priori statement. I'm going to get into a subject, it's absolute garbage. I hope you can explain why you think it's garbage, Steve.
Rude chat Martin South Ricardo. Well,
I can't hear what Sargon's saying now.
So, we're in a sort of position of what would happen if you gave Leonardo da Vinci a garage door opener. So how...
Something about Leonardo da Vinci? I can't hear. What's Sargon saying?
Puthoff, an engineer who conducted
Al Puthoff, I think I said.
research on extrasensory perception for the CIA. This is the...
Oh, sorry.
Al Puthoff is worked for the Stanford Research Institute. He was a CIA parapsychologist who studied Uri Geller, and I believe recruited him as a psychic spy in 1972. Geller has admitted working for Mossad and the CIA. Something he denied. Something he admitted to John Ronson a few years earlier, but then said, "Don't tell anyone, I'll just deny it." So he did admit it to John Ronson a few years earlier, and no one believed Ronson when Ronson reported it. John Ronson is not the most trustworthy guy in the world, but it seems that he was telling the truth. Geller did say this, and Geller admitted it later on. Hal Puthoff, incidentally, is part, as I think I explained in the live stream, the last live stream, is part of this organisation that Tom DeLonge has set up, this To the Stars Academy. It's interesting.
He's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, he's an engineer. Right, okay. That makes sense.
Hal Puthoff, no, he's a guy who studied Uri Geller. Interesting chap, Russell Targ it was. He did a lot of research into psychic research for the CIA. Again, the whole... I'll just get him carry on because he's about to bring up Ronson and the men hysteric goats.
Was it the men hysteric goats or whatever? I haven't seen it, but
I've seen the Men Who Stare at Goats. The Men Who Stare at Goats, the movie, is amusing, but it's misleading. The documentary, Crazy Rulers of the World, and the book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, is a lot better.
Yeah, that it's supposed to be based on this kind of kooky shit.
I have seen it, and it's quite an entertaining film, and it's certainly...
Well, I'm glad we agree on something, Steve.
I'd say that falls into the kooky shit category, for sure.
Well, if you get your information from that movie, yes. But the movie is a true story. It's a fictionalisation of a comedy fictionalisation of a true story. Please look at the true story as well.
No one got to have any kind of mind control over it.
Have you read the Men Who Stare at Goats and the Crazy Rulers of the World? Have you watched the Crazy Rulers of the World documentary? The Men Who Stare at Goats book is a fictional book. It's not a fictional book, it's a factual book. Please read it if you haven't.
Look, it's not kooky shit as you call it. Okay, it was a funded, approved government program involving several people, including a U.S. Army intelligence General Stubblebine.
But they decided it was a failure. It just didn't work.
No, they said that, but it still went on. I mean, Geller has admitted it. Stubblebine and all these people who are involved in this. There's several people. Colonel John Alexander, who I mentioned on Miles. I mentioned that on Miles's live stream the other day. He was involved in this. This has continued. I mean, for all we know, it's still going on today. Geller said that he worked all through the 70s and 80s as part of this. He worked for Mossad, he was an Israeli patriot. Geller was actually on Red Ice shortly before they went alt-right, and he actually talked about this. I really do... I don't accept that they decided there was nothing in it and they just ended it in the early 70s. I don't believe that. It doesn't fit with the evidence. Stubblebine is now quite active in the organic foods movement, and some people say he's not to be trusted. I don't know.
There is nothing to remote viewing.
Yes,
there
there
is nothing to consciously connecting to aliens. It's all rubbish. I'll tell you what, Ben, if you get...
I'm sorry to use the cliched, Steve, but that's what they want you to think. Oh, I'm going to rewind slightly because I interrupted in mid-sentence. There we go.
There is nothing to remote viewing. There is nothing to consciously connecting to aliens.
Yes,
It's all rubbish.
No,
I'll tell you what, Ben, if you get to see this video, I mean, you go to all these things and you see all these loonies. If one of them tells you that they can do remote viewing, or that, you know, tell them, ask them to demonstrate it.
I have. Tony Topping. I've talked about this. I think I talked. Did I? No, it was an article. It wasn't a. I don't think it was a Panama TV video, but he was at Heinrich and Paranormal a couple of years ago, and I did ask him to demonstrate it. And it wasn't a laboratory. It wasn't under laboratory conditions, but it was very, very convincing. And I'm quite happy to. I would be quite happy to see this scientifically tested. I don't have a problem with that.
You know, I can see you've got a bookshelf there. Say, okay, on my bookshelf, the second shelf down, fourth book in, not one obviously that appears on the screen, maybe the second book in from the right because we don't see that side of the bookcase, and just tell me what the name of that book is. If they can remote view, it's not terribly clear, you know, like the psychics do, that the media...
Sorry, are you talking about my bookshelf, Steve? Which book? I mean, I've done a video called Books on My Shelf where I go through all the books I have. I don't know which book are you talking about, my shelf or your shelf? Sorry, it's not very clear. Are you? Hang on, let me go back. Sorry.
Not one obviously that appears on the screen.
Go back slightly.
One of them tells you that they can do remote viewing, or that, you know, tell them, ask them to demonstrate it.
I do.
I can see you've got a bookshelf there. Say, okay, on my bookshelf, the second shelf down, fourth book in, not one obviously that appears on the screen, maybe the second book in from the right because we don't see that side of the bookcase, and just tell me what the name of that book is.
Okay.
If they...
I think you were either talking about 2/3 by David Percy and Michael Myers, or Bloodlines of the Illuminati by Fritz Springmeier. Second shelf down, you said third or fourth book from the right. I'm not sure. Anyway,
they can remote.
Like I've said, I have done an entire video. It's a 2-part video. I think it's about altogether it's about 5 hours or something. Or was it just one part? I did DVDs on my shelf, and I did books on my shelf, and you can find them. You can see them. You can watch. Well, I talk about all these books in detail. So if this is the book you mean, what's your point, Steve?
View is not terribly clear, you know, like the psychics do, that the mediums, you know, not the smalls or the extra larges, but the mediums, they'll say, oh yes, it's coming through, it's a little bit cloudy, I can't quite see, I can see a book, you know. It's all garbage, you know. Either you can see it or you can't. Either you can remote view or you...
Oh, I see. You want me to do a scientific test using whether people can see things on my shelf which it's not visible through normal sensory perception. I see what you mean now, yeah. Steve, that's a good idea, but I mean... Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. So, are you saying that I would have a problem with that?
You can't. So, if someone tells you they can do remote viewing, just try that experiment, Ben. And just ask them to remote view something in your room there, or your house, whatever that is, with your, you know, on your bookshelf, on your table, whatever it is, and tell you precisely what it is. And you'll hear everything under the sun, apart from, sure, Ben, it's a book by Timothy Good. I can't remember what the titles are now, but he's got 2 or 3 books there.
I've got a whole load of books by Timothy Good, yeah.
And there's bound to be one of those on Ben's shelf. Actually, no, that's a bad example, isn't it? Make it something non-UFO.
Yeah, that's too obvious, isn't it?
Related, Ben, because they might just by luck stumble across it. But I had one of these nuts at work.
I should point out actually that what you've suggested is actually a good idea, and I'm quite happy to try that with anyone who claims to be a remote viewer. At the same time, I know very well that just phoning someone up and saying what's on my shelf is not a scientifically, it's not a double-blinded, laboratory conditioned test. And the moment someone passes that test, Steve, I don't know if it'll be you personally, but some skeptic will raise the bar. They'll say, yes, but. And I talk about that in my skeptic video. Okay? So we know this is going to, but we both know this would happen. Okay? So I'll carry on.
He believed in free energy. He was trying to develop a device for producing free energy, and I said, "You're wasting your time."
Is that Keshi? Are you talking about Keshi now?
He wanted me to give him a hand.
Sorry, your friend at work. Sorry, you were talking about a friend. I'll go back a bit. Hang on.
He believed in free energy. He was trying to develop a device for producing free energy, and I said, "You're wasting your time." He wanted me to give him a hand with it, and I said, "Certainly not." He said that aliens were running the planet, and I said, well, tell them, next time you see them, tell them they're doing a piss poor job.
Well, it depends from whose point of view. But yeah, I mean, you had a friend at work who said he was developing free energy, and okay, well, it's possible he didn't know what he was talking about. It's possible that, you know, he was somebody like, he may have been someone like me, who might have had the same conversation with you that you're having now. And there's no more reason to disbelieve him than there is for me to disbelieve myself in this conversation I'm having with you now.
And he also said that he could do remote viewing. So I said to him, okay, you can do remote viewing. I've got a very unusual object in my lounge room. Can you tell me what it is and whereabouts in the lounge room it's sitting? And he said, I choose not to demonstrate my remote viewing ability. In other words, he's full of shit. You know.
Or he failed to demonstrate his remote viewing app. Maybe he is full of shit. Maybe he wasn't a real remote viewer. Maybe he was a complete mountebank and he was winding you up. It's possible. Did you mention that you were a skeptic to your colleague before you? Because he may have said these things. I don't know him. I don't know what your conversations were. It's possible he might have been pulling your strings a bit, Steve. I've known people who do that. I had a guy at work once who said that he knew about a crash retrieval in Banbury, and I talked to him a bit and realised he was bullshitting to basically see how much I would believe. And when he realised I didn't believe him, he just shut up about it. And there was no crash retrieval in Banbury. It's all bollocks. It's all bollocks.
It's not real. It's rubbish. Okay, well I'll pause it there again.
Removing Jeff Bridges and that other little squid. That's not very good. I recommend rather.
There we are.
The other little squid.
Now we're talking about the film again. The Men Who Stare at Goats, starring Jeff Bridges and what's his name? Not Kyle MacLachlan. Funny, I couldn't remember his name when I was doing this video. I can't remember his name. Ewan McGregor.
So presumably you wouldn't like to look like George Clooney then, Ben?
No, he's way too old.
Ronson's documentary, The Crazy Rules of the World, and also his book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is much better than his previous works. Things like Them and the conspiracy theory stuff he did. And the one he did with David Icke was awful.
Talking about, I've got slightly ahead of myself because I'm talking about The Men Who Stare at Goats now.
No, this is a lot better.
Yeah, put a line through David Icke. It's nonsense.
Really? Oh, put a line through David Icke. Here we go. Come on, you little special snowflake. Get a good look at that. You'll be retreating to your little safe space now, won't you? Your skeptics in a pub event. Yeah.
It was a real project, Sargon, and it was taken seriously. It was taken seriously, and it was taken seriously for a long period of time, which means it was getting results.
Well, not necessarily. It may mean that you know, people told people that it was getting results in order to get funding because they were having a jolly good time playing around with this stuff.
Oh, you've never worked in government service, Steve. I take it. You know. The thing about it is this is the case with the NHS, and it's you don't lie to people to get funding because it only works for a while, and you get into serious trouble legally if you do. So if somebody was running a project where they say they were getting results to the tune of whatever, having $1 million a year that was being spent on this program, and they were getting results, it was only a matter of time before some auditor would find out and their heads would roll. Honestly, the reason, I mean, we're kind of repeating myself a bit here. The reason they didn't publish results, or so the reason why what you're saying is that basically they tried it for a while and it didn't work, so they just gave up on it. Okay, this is your point. It's the same point you made earlier on. What I think happened instead was they tried it for a while within the Department of Defense, or within whatever other project through the Stanford Research Institute and the CIA. They worked on it for a while there, and then they decided to classify it at a higher level. In other words, it went black. And it continued to go black. Now, a lot of people have spoken out since then to say they were part of this operation, including Uri Geller, who's a very successful celebrity and has no real reason to make this stuff up. There's a lot more. This is a big subject, but there's an awful lot more that indicates this was going. And what's more, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was doing the same. In World War II, I mean, it goes back much further. I mean, if you watch my Helen Duncan video, this has a very, very long tradition in the history of human conflict. Alexander the Great used to consult a soothsayer before going into battle. So did Julius Caesar. In World War II, we know that the Nazis were very much involved with a psychic called Maria Ortiz. The British locked up Helen Duncan because of this whole situation. I've done an entire video about that. So I think you are assuming something incorrectly now.
And I think the way it worked was that the Americans tried this kooky remote viewing program. I can't remember where it was based now, but there's
several places. The Stanford Research Institute, like I've said. There was the Goat Lab, which was what was it called? It was the largest army base, I think, in America. I know that Colonel John Alexander talked about it, and he ran this project where they were trying to actually stop the heart of a goat by staring at it. But that was at, I can't remember where it was, but I think it was Kansas or Texas or somewhere like that.
Oh, what's that doco called? There's a good doco that I saw. What the hell was that called? If I can find it, I'll leave.
Oh, do you mean Crazy Rulers of the World? Because that was good. That was very good.
A link to it below, but it's quite a good documentary. But I think it's quite a lot of fanciful tripe, personally. What was it? I think the Russians found out that the Americans were playing around with this thing, so they started their own program.
They did. The Soviet Union got involved in this, which can't have been very popular because they were Marxists, and these things don't exist under Marxist doctrine. But they did actually do it. I mean, they probably because they knew it was just useful, because they had an idea what was working, and they knew it would be useful. You can imagine it would be even harder to sell it to them on that side of the Iron Curtain than it was in the Western world. Yet they still did it. Now they're not going to pretend they're getting results and get away with it.
They thought there must be something to it if the Americans are playing with it, so we'll start a program up. CIA then finds out that the Russians are playing around with remote viewing and psychic intelligence, so they report that back to Langley, and the Americans say, well, if the Russians are playing around with it, there must be something to it. We'll put more money into our remote viewing program. But the bottom line is, it's all rubbish. You find one remote viewer that can remote view something accurate, Ben. There's a challenge for you. Well, I'll tell you what, better still.
Okay, a challenge. Well, if you want a challenge, can I find a remote viewer that can do things accurately under laboratory conditions? I could give you numerous examples where this has been done. I mean, for instance, what's his name? Robert Monroe and his project. Please look into that. Look into the work done by Professor Peter Fenwick, Dr. Peter Fenwick and his studies. Look into the work of Rupert Sheldrake. Okay, that you challenge me. That's my answer. I haven't done it personally. I haven't found people myself, but I can direct you to resources where this has been done, and it has been demonstrated in properly controlled laboratory conditions.
Sure. You find a remote viewer that can remote view the peculiar object I have in my lounge room. And tell
It's an anal plug, Steve. It's an anal plug, isn't it? I don't need to be a remote viewer to know that.
me where in the lounge room it is and what the object is.
It's under your settee, so that when the visitors come round, you can hide it so that they don't see it.
There's a challenge for you.
Which are probably
Am I right? I'm right, aren't I?
classified. You probably don't know about a lot of it because it's classified.
Yeah, well that's... yeah.
Exactly.
It's always classified, isn't it? Yeah.
Is that unreasonable? We know this happens with things such as aviation projects. Why shouldn't it happen under other circumstances? There are occasions where something starts to be developed in the white world, and then it goes grey and then it goes black. I mean, just a very, very good documentary I recommend is Nick Cook's $1 Billion Secret, which talks about the development of secret spy planes during the Cold War and beyond. Because it's a perfect example about how this technology brought in, sometimes quite openly in the open scientific community, and is then sequestered. It is appropriated by the secret government.
Of course. Okay, so... what's this? Oh,
He's watching
I thought
telly
for a
now.
second there, that might have been the 1952.
Oh, goodness, honestly, Steve, you're telling me Australian television is more interesting than me. That's the worst insult you've actually given me all day. And I think we saw there was a picture of the White House. I think you're going to say about the 1952 Washington invasion.
Look, UFOs on the brain. I thought
Yeah.
that might have been the 1952 UFO thing. But never mind.
That was that. He's referring to an incident where there was actually a major UFO a major UFO incident around Washington D.C., the U.S. Capitol, where objects were seen. They were picked up on radar. They came right up to they were seen near the White House. That was very interesting indeed.
Which was, of course, a reconstruction done by the History Channel, by the way. If you ever see a video of is that Congress or the Senate, whatever it is, in 1952,
The halls of Congress, the big dome. Yeah, that's right.
spacecraft flying behind it, that is not real footage from the time.
No.
Ben may think otherwise.
No, oh, shut up, Steve. I don't think otherwise. I know it is a recreation. I know because that same footage was used in Nick Cook's, another of Nick Cook's documentaries called UFOs: The Secret Evidence. I know it's not real.
Opinion on that one, but that was a recreation done for the History Channel. There is no video or no pictures of that incident. Suppose.
Well, in 1952, people didn't tend to carry cameras around with them. They were like big boxy things. So yeah.
Alleged incident.
But if it's carried on, I mean, what Ronson uncovered, I think, was just that
It wasn't an alleged incident. It was officially documented. The 1952 Washington incident was officially documented. It happened.
the tip of the iceberg.
No, I think there's some very interesting things you can do with psychology.
Hang on, but Roswell is the tip of an iceberg. What? I know you're talking about what? There's some interesting things you can do with psychology. What are they, Steve? I've got a feeling I'm going to go crazy in it. If he's going to say what I think he's going to say, then he's in big trouble.
And people can be easily fooled into thinking there's something going on. If you watch Derren Brown, who is a psychological, he plays with people's minds basically, but it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
So if you watch Derren Brown,
I do.
any of his sort of programs, you'll see very quickly that he always says he has no special powers. It's all a con, and he carries out these demonstrations
Yes, he does. That's true.
to show that he can come up with all this stuff and how it works. And of course, there's nothing supernatural, extrasensory
So he says.
about it.
Right. Well, yeah. Believe it or not, Steve, seeing as I'm so good at cherry picking, I actually do watch Derren Brown. I studied him very carefully. He's obviously a very talented fellow. He's a very, very talented chap. If you ever, I'm thinking of going to one of his live shows at some point. Actually, he has the skeptical worldview, which I don't agree with. He's part of this tradition which I talk about in my skeptic video. This connection between stage illusion and the skeptic movement, which is very, very strong. But Firstly, it doesn't explain what I've just been talking about. I've written several articles, and I think I might have even done a video where I talk about Derren Brown, and I provide a critique of him. What's more, he has falsified some of the things he's done. One in particular is called Apocalypse. That was said to be a documentary, and it was not. It was concocted. It was fiction. It was fiction, and he didn't admit it. He presented it as a documentary. It didn't take a lot. It didn't take very much study and conjecture to actually work out that that was actually a fictionalized program. But so then he misleads. You've got to realise Derren Brown misleads his viewers in more ways than one. Okay.
Nothing whatsoever.
Well, Derren Brown says he doesn't believe in paranormal phenomena. Fair enough. He presents a sceptical case in many of his programs, which is fair enough. He doesn't say anything I'd consider original, particularly. He just does it in his own style, which is in his own sort of very original style, which is very entertaining. The one I would particularly recommend is Seance. I didn't write a review of that, but I mean the premise of Seance is he explains the various tricks used by psychics to make people think they're really psychic when they're not. I don't agree with this, and I can actually put a counterclaim to that. However, it's an extremely entertaining program, and it's a good introduction, I think, to the skeptic point of view of this, because I do recommend people look at both sides of the story on this. I've always said that, actually, and in my skeptic video I talk about how I've done so. So I mean, again, it baffles me and annoys me that Steve is so convinced I'm a cherry picker.
But the iceberg is there. It lasted. It wasn't just a flash in the pan thing, a folly which they abandoned because they thought because.
Well, they did abandon it, Ben,
No,
but
they didn't.
it might have been a little bit later. Okay,
We're talking about the remote viewing program. No, they didn't abandon it, Steve. I don't believe they did.
pause it there. But the bottom line is they abandoned it because it was rubbish.
The Guardian.
Basically the same information. The
Guardian are reporting UFOs.
Well, you do know, of course, that you can't read The Guardian unless you're wearing a very thick white knitted jumper.
Absolutely. I don't have one of those, I'm afraid. I do read The Guardian sometimes. I don't enjoy it. It just tends to trigger the hell out of me. But yeah, I don't have that jumper, but somehow I still manage to read The Guardian.
I'm surprised. I really assumed that The Guardian would actually overlook it altogether.
Says Ben, wearing his baseball cap backwards.
What's the point? Look, what's the point? What's your point there? I'm wearing a baseball cap backwards. This is actually this is an Australian flag. You see, you unpatriotic swine. And the reason I watch wear it backwards is because if I don't, you see the peak has kind of gone a bit. So if I don't wear it backwards, it tends to do that. Okay, that's why I wear it backwards. So I don't know what your point is. Is that making a judgment on what I'm saying? Does that weaken my case, the fact that I wear this hat in this particular style? Does it? If so, please explain how.
Here we go. Cadets does actually feature this one. Last year, John First Sheriff Hill.
I'm actually put a comment on here. Okay, here we are. Stand by for my reply video. Stand by for my reply video. I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to say any more, but I'm just going to mention to Steve that I'm making this video because I will upload this as soon as I don't think I need to edit it. I'll upload it as soon as I've finished filming it, and I'll just put some titles on and edit it, and then well, not edit it, not cut any bits out. I'll just sort of like splice it, and then I'll upload it.
Clinton's presidential campaign declared that he had convinced her to explore
What's Sargon's saying now?
government documents related to UFOs should she win the election.
He did, and in fact, Hillary said so at the New Hampshire primaries.
New Hampshire primaries. Oh, we're talking about the Clintons now, yeah. Sargon mentions the Clintons now. Funnily enough, Hillary Clinton brought up the subject of UFOs during her campaign. This is why Steve Bassett was so keen on her winning and becoming the disclosure president.
Now, I mean,
Yeah, but the thing is, you got a short memory, Ben. Bill Clinton said exactly the same thing.
Did he?
And he was elected, and he got in, and he From my recollection, Bill Clinton was President of the United States.
Hang on. Did Bill Clinton bring up the subject of UFOs in his campaign? Where did he do that? I mean, he has mentioned UFOs several times. He mentioned it in his post-presidential years, for instance, on the Jimmy Kimmel show a couple of years ago. But Hillary Clinton actually made this a part of her campaign. What's more, her campaign manager, John Podesta, of Pizzagate fame, or infamy, has mentioned this too. This is why Steve was so keen on these particular individuals. It's slightly different. I mean, I don't know if Bill Clinton on his campaign, it was a long time ago, so I don't think having a short memory, not being able to remember that, I think is not really a fair criticism. If I'm wrong, then let me know and I'll correct. But it's not quite on the same scale as far as I can see, Steve.
Never revealed anything. It's a way of buying votes. You know, there's nothing.
Really, a way of buying votes? You mean that there's actually there's the official UFO vote? Do you mean people like me make up a sector of the electorate that any candidate has to appeal to? Is that what you're saying?
To it, it's rubbish. Okay, pause it.
If so, then it's encouraging. It shows how many of us there are and how influential we are, how we can be kingmakers, ladies and gentlemen. If you're a tinfoil hat wearing loon with a telescope pointing at the sky, you can make or break a government. Yeah, so I think Jeremy Corbyn might rue the day that he never took us seriously.
Yeah. Okay, I've just moved on a bit. I think he actually mentions Bill Clinton here.
This is form which you tie them together, and then
I was talking about Clinton tying his shoelaces. This is Hillary, of course. He wouldn't trust her to tie his shoelaces.
Tie shoelaces. I don't know what this is about. Sorry.
A drawing pin on my chair, but the fact of the matter was, this did happen.
Oh, I saw about people playing tricks on each other, drawing pin on your chair, stuff like this.
Okay, this was discussed at that level. Unlike Stephen Bassett, I don't.
Yeah, but they're people, Ben. You know, I mean, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, they're just people. And they have an interest.
No, they're not people, they're reptilians, Steve. Oh, don't get me started on that one.
Interest in UFOs. I think Prince Philip has an interest in UFOs.
He does indeed. And Timothy Good has written about Prince Philip and his interest. Yeah, I know they have an interest, but you know, there's a very, very different. It's a very different situation to having this interest and expressing this interest on a campaign trail when you're trying to get elected to office. This is very, very, very important point. Now, I mean, I could bring up Simon Parkes and people like that, and there's this lady in America she's running to be a congresswoman, and she is an abductee, and she talks openly about it. But I mean, this is the level. This is the president of the United States. This is the head of state and government.
Prince Charles, there's someone in the royal family that's quite into it. It doesn't matter who you are. Who you are doesn't determine what things interest you.
I don't know. Yeah, not interest you. Yeah, but it does determine on what you say about it publicly.
I believe that the defeat of Hillary Clinton is actually an obstacle in the quest for possible willing disclosure. If anything, it's the other way around. I've done an entire video on that called UFO Disclosure 2017.
I'm just talking about how I think that maybe Trump is more likely to be the disclosure president than Clinton.
Trump.
Yeah, I saw a thing about Bill Clinton.
Oh, look at that one. Always good for a giggle is Ben.
Well, maybe I'll see. I could think what a career I could have made out of being a comedian, Steve. I could have been the next Bill Hicks. All I had to do was stop talking about crazy stuff.
He was on a talk show where he was like,
Jimmy Kimmel.
They were asking him, so, were you able to find anything about aliens? And he was like, well, I did ask. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Bill Clinton made several rather cryptic and suggestive statements about UFOs, indicating that he thinks they're real, but the truth's out there, but he doesn't know about it.
Yeah, well, that is fair enough, you know.
No, it's not. The way he was saying it is that he's essentially laying out a disclaimer. I mean, I talk about this in my UFO disclosure series, but he's not just saying it for the saying, well, I just happen to have this interest, and well, I asked and they didn't tell me and stuff like that. the fact that he said publicly in the positions that he has indicates some kind of strategy. He's trying to exonerate himself in any future truth or reconciliation process in a possible post-disclosure world.
I mean, he's got an interest in the subject. He thinks they're probably real. Like myself, I think, you know, some of them probably are, but it'd be a very, very small percentage.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you actually do accept that. I mean, you do understand that some of these things are real. Again, I'd have to ask you why you dismiss other elements of this phenomenon. But it is a small. I mean, it is a small percentage of those reported. It's true. I don't know how to put a figure on it, but it's probably at least 2/3 are explicable as Chinese lanterns and things like that.
But he doesn't have any proof that they are, any more than I do.
What would constitute proof? A saucer in a hangar, to quote His Royal Popeness? Or what? If not that, what? Because we want to get a position where we don't end up raising the bar, as I explained.
So that's what he's saying, you know. I think Ben thinks there are warehouses full of recovered alien spacecraft, you know, which is absolute nonsense.
Well, I do think that, Steve, and I explain why I think that. I don't believe Bob Bigelow has any recovered alien spacecraft. The most Bob Bigelow will have at his own facility is like some small fragments, but that's all I think he was probably his remit was within this program. But there obviously in other facilities there will be more decisive evidence, and based on my work on crash retrievals, including the one in Nottinghamshire in 1987, it's probably a global phenomenon. Probably most countries have these pieces of evidence, or they have gathered it and it may have been transferred to other countries.
I don't know whether it's further on in this or further back, but he was talking about the Los Angeles incident during the war, I think it was.
Did I mention that? Yes, the Los Angeles invasion. This was an incident in 1942. In January 1942, a disc-shaped object, you can see it quite clearly in the photographs, hovered over the city of Los Angeles, California. It was immediately engaged by anti-aircraft artillery. Perhaps understandably, this was just a few weeks after Pearl Harbor, and everyone assumed that the Japanese would try and attack again. The craft appeared undamaged by anything that they were firing at. You can actually see the shells bursting against the hull and fragments falling down in the newspaper photographs. The searchlights are all focused on this object. You can see it very clearly. There were a number of people. There was a number of deaths and injuries from that falling shrapnel. Actually, that's a mystery that's never been solved.
Where there was an illuminated craft, or some people say it was an illuminated craft. They had a lot of searchlights.
You can see it very clearly. It's a classic disc.
Concentrated on one particular spot, and they were putting lots of artillery shells into everything else. And of course, nothing happened.
The anti-aircraft artillery, over 1,400 rounds of AAA were discharged against this object. That should have brought down anything flying in the world at that time or at any time. This thing was totally unaffected by it.
So let's assume that that's real. And they're putting all the artillery, they're giving it everything they've got, and they can't, they can't bring this thing down. It doesn't even know they're there. So, what is going to bring down alien spacecraft that you might have stuck in a shed somewhere? What's going to bring down this supposed thing at Roswell,
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting that Roswell craft was shot down, Steve. I never said that.
It's nonsense.
See, on the subject of weapons that we might have which can engage UFOs, in all the reported cases of conflict between UFOs and humans, all the ones I've heard, or nearly all the ones I've heard so far, is where the humans come off an awful lot worse, which you'd expect with the technological gulf between our two species. Yet there's some evidence to suggest some kind of weaponry has been developed. I suggest looking at Carol Rosin and her weaponization of space reports. There's also there's some footage from the space shuttle which were filmed in space that appear to show some kind of weapon being wielded against a UFO and an attempt to shoot one down. And the UFO takes evasive action to get away from this weapon. It's quite a famous piece of footage, which indicates the UFO was concerned, or whatever was in the UFO was concerned. But it's a question. I don't know what's been developed in secret. I don't know whether the weaponry that was used on 9/11 may have been developed into something that could bring down a craft. I don't know, but I'm certainly not suggesting the Roswell incident is a product of this kind of engagement.
Bassett says, and he may be right, that Clinton is essentially putting in a disclaimer. He's saying, look, don't blame me.
That's what he has.
It was like when he did this speech. He did the speech where he talked about a letter he received from a 12-year-old boy.
Right, from Belfast.
I can't take your word for this.
He said, I received a letter from Ryan from Belfast. Mr. President, are UFOs real? Have you got one at Roswell? Well, Ryan, I wish they'd tell me, because so far no one said a word. That may have been, as Steve said, that might have been Clinton signalling his innocence. He may have been aware of something coming up, and he didn't want to end up in the dock afterwards. The book AD, After Disclosure, by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel, is one I very much recommend for details about the possible legal implications of the disclosure process.
I don't want to take no media away for anything, but especially when it was something like this. And something happened to the Kura event, Spring Klein Rawson, one of the authors of the New York Times.
This is one of the journalists that's been covering it, Ralph Blumenthal. He's done an interesting article.
Ralph Blumenthal, I think, was the guy from the New York Times who wrote about this. He was one of the people who first wrote about the revelations in December about the secret UFO program.
He's been appeared on a couple of news stories about this.
The New York Times reports on MSNBC.
Sorry, Sargon's just waffling now.
I don't think, if I was a journalist, I could go on TV and start talking about alien material.
Why not, if the evidence is there?
Yeah. He said, why not if the evidence is there? Because this journalist going on talking about alien material, if the evidence is there, why not? I've already replied to Sargon about this. This is supposed to be a reply to Steve, but I've gone down to another reply level. But basically, Sargon is speculating on credulity here. He's saying, well, he's assuming there's no evidence, therefore he can't quite accept that Blumenthal actually was willing to write about this subject. Which is a false. It's as much a fallacy as the ones that Steve is committing.
Why not if the evidence is there?
Yes, Steve.
Well, yeah. I couldn't agree more, Ben.
Well, there you are.
It never is, though, is it?
Yes, it is.
There never is any evidence. There's a few fuzzy videos, and there's a lot of bullshit stories.
But there is, there's more than a fuzz. There is a grayscale image from the US Navy, which was recently released. That's not a fuzzy video. We have the pilot confirming it. We have it's an official release from the Department of Defense. That's not a fuzzy video, Steve.
There is no evidence. Anyway, I've just about had enough of this. I'm sort of holding the camera in my left hand, and it's becoming uncomfortable.
Well, get a tripod, like I said. You get one of those small, sort of like chain link tripods. You can pick them up for a couple of quid from a camera shop. Just go to Jessup's or whatever you have in Australia and ask for one.
So I'm gonna call it on this one. Anyway, just a quick reply to Ben's reply. If you manage to stick with it all the way to here, thanks for watching. Maybe I'll catch you another time.
Well, that's the end of Steve's video. I must say I enjoyed that. So thanks, Steve, for making the video. I do like to be challenged when people are polite and respectful and operate on a rational level. It's when you get the trolls calling your names that I kick up. I don't ban people for doing what you've done. I don't ignore them, despite you claim that I ignore you. I've never willingly ignored you. And, well, I can see you've got... Let's have a look at some of your other videos here. Just go check out his channel. Oh, you can actually see him. My goodness me, he looks like Richard Dolan. This is weird. Steve Mumbling looks like Richard Dolan. There's some photos of him where you can see his face. Has anyone ever seen Richard Dolan and Steve Mumbling together in the same room? I think we have another conspiracy theory here. Unbelievable footage of UFO landing. David Icke's lizard people. Tunguska debunked. Roswell UFO crash debunked. Several of those. The Philadelphia Experiment, Rendlesham Forest, Max Spears, NASA moon landing happened, get over it. The Nazi, the Nazi ballot. Hilarious garbage. My goodness, sentient black goo, free energy, ET disclosure 2018, Dr. Judy Wood, more 9/11 nonsense. Miles Johnson e-begging, whatever next. Oh God. I see this is not going to be the last reply video I make to you, Steve. You've essentially thrown down the gauntlet here. I can't resist replying to people who are at least capable of a certain level of rational discussion and the ability to understand rational points. Which is why I've replied to, it's just, I always actually have answered all the comments I can that you've posted on my videos, and I will continue to do so. But I'm obviously going to make some more videos about this. So, and I do appreciate the challenge. I do think I should thank you for challenging me in this way, because I enjoy this. You enjoy what I do for various reasons. You find it entertaining. I can say the same for you and people like you. And without people like you, I don't know, there's the conspiratorial community, the conspirasphere, the UFO ufology world would be an awful lot less interesting. So keep it up and expect more from me in terms of replying videos to you. So thanks, Steve, for that, and thank all of you for watching Panmo TV yet again. Hospital Port as pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.